Hello, friends. This week, my guest is Jake Keller. Jake Keller is in the food tech industry. He works up at a lab in the Berkeley, California area. And it was really cool to talk to Jake because he and I both share a passion for all things growing mushrooms, all kinds of mushrooms. And we both got into it for similar reasons. And this podcast is interesting as well because we covered a broad area. We covered everything from just getting a general sense of what's going on in the biotech and food tech world, all the way to talking about Jake's individual experience with using psychedelics. And it's interesting because this is probably the first podcast where I got to share a little bit about some of my experiences from my one and only significant psychedelic dose. And it's a struggle to talk about the experience of using psychedelics. One, because as I say it over and over again, we just don't have the language to talk about the experience. But I really enjoyed hearing someone else try to put to words the experience they had and the impact that it had on their own life. And it's something that I am a big believer in terms of the potential for how we can use psychedelics to bring healing and bring positive experiences to people. So it was really a pleasure to talk to Jake about some of those personal experiences that he's had and his journey from, going in and learning about biology and a traditional education in Colorado, all the way to the work he's doing in Berkeley and running this lab, and his desire to create a business using mushrooms. So we covered some really, really cool stuff, and I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think you're going to like it too. So without further ado, Jake Keller. Well, thank you, Jake. I appreciate you joining and being a part of the Everyman podcast. You reached out to me on Instagram and right away offered to start connecting me to people in the biotech community up in the Bay Area. So in my mind, I kind of see you as the connector. You kind of have lots of connections to lots of people in biotech, and been really helpful for me to connect to the broader bio community. So thank you for that, and thank you for being on.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, I like to connect people that are doing cool things in the world, and with everyone's mission, I like to, align missions. And if people are working on certain projects, they should know about other people in the world that are working on similar things. So I think that's helpful. But yeah, thanks for having me on, and you're a good person to know. We've connected a few times, and I like everything that you're interested in, and you seem to have good intentions for the world and your projects.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What makes you interested in bio? I mean, it sort of is the theme of your career, right? I mean, that's kind of what you work on. What draws you to this field?
Sure. Oh man, I just really love watching things grow and learning about things. And uh, I mean, physics and other, STEM disciplines, I would say like they're very defined and very once there's like theories and models for these things, they're kind of stuck. Whereas biology is like super elastic. You remove one species or one single type of tree or something, and it's like the entire landscape can change. And so I really like how dynamic biology is, and also just how important it is to us. So that's having a place in it, having a stake in it. It's almost feeling like we are biology, and so it's something to know. That's always been attractive to me.
Yeah, I share that. I think biology offers me a connection to the world that I just didn't get with purely technical roles that you might, like my background's in fintech, software engineering, and there's virtually no connection to nature or to humanity. It's all numbers and bits and digits and money and intangible things. But biology is very connected and grounded in who we are as people with life and just the broader universe. So I share that sentiment with you.
Yeah, I'm surprised that more people aren't interested in biology with everything, everything that it has to offer. I think we can maybe this is new, maybe with synthetic biology, like all these industries that had previously kind of like looked to other solutions, whether they're chemistry or otherwise, synthetics. I think there's like renewed interest in biology right now, which is really good to see.
Yeah, that's interesting. Where do you gauge that, or how do you gauge that renewed interest? Like, where are you picking up that pulse of there being a movement in the collective consciousness of people towards an interest in bio.
Yeah, I think I see it like with how much people want alternatives, and directly, in my vision, I'm in food tech, so food and food innovation is top of mind, of course, but there's so many alternatives like in the beauty industry or in, medicine and pharmaceuticals. Biology holds the keys to solving some of these problems that have been really persistent for the last like 30 to 50 years as we've continued to grow, in chemistry knowledge and all of that, and modeling and computer algorithms being able to predict like how molecules are going to behave with each other. Biology is like kind of the finishing step, I think. So I think now it's just coming around to the point where we can start solving like other industries' challenges and stop like holding biology to its own, realm of science and production.
Yeah, that's interesting. How did you get your start in bio? And maybe you could just talk a little bit about what you do now and your, some of what you've done in your career.
Sure. I guess like going back, I got my start in bio like on the playground, or like playing baseball, like being out in the outfield and like pulling the grass and just being like, oh, there's bugs out here. There's like things going on out here. And like I had always been just distracted by biology. Like I don't, maybe this is common, I don't know, but like my favorite classes were the ones that were kind of like all over the place. Like we have so much to learn and like just throwing information at me. I loved that stuff. Whereas like the dull, kind of more like scripted, canonized, like literature type of subjects, like I've always struggled with those more so. So I would say biology was super interesting to me from just the get-go, really. But ultimately, I started studying biology at CU. At CU Boulder, where I went to school. I thought I wanted to, go pre-med, and then I took a hike and just took a biology class, freshman biology class, and it just stuck with me. And I was like, this is really what I want to do, something here. And of course, cannabis had been legalized in 2012, and I knew that there was cannabis genomics going on campus, and wanted to really get involved in that. And once I got my foot in the door there and saw like the big wide world of science and all the applications that it had, especially in such a niche that I was interested in at that point in time in my life, like cannabis, something that is super intriguing to a lot of college students. Biology just met me where I was at and was like, opened the door, like, whoa, you can take your interest and just run with it. And yeah, I don't know. That's how I got interested. What about you? What was your origin story?
Well, you and I have talked a little bit about this. I mean, I don't have a bio background at all. I don't have a degree in it. I'm completely self-taught, like a lot of DIYers. And I actually just have some questions for you about that. But for me, it was probably started a little over a decade ago when I was outside of my apartment in Boston and I saw a mushroom on the ground. And my entire life, I'd never stopped and taken a moment to just observe that mushroom and ask the question, what is this organism? Like, why do these things pop up? Where does this interesting thing come from? And I was just at a point in my life where I was able to take some time out and do a little bit of research and discovered the world of fungi. And I found an amazing online community of people that like to grow mushrooms at home. I didn't even know that was something that you could do. And I found out that it's actually kind of difficult to grow at home because of the, sterile environment and conditions that you need. And that sort of planted a seed in my mind of, holy crap, there's something really interesting here, because nature seems to do something very easy with growing mushrooms that is very difficult to replicate indoors. And when I say very difficult from someone who's completely brand new, I mean, there's a lot of, once you learn it, and you can learn to do it, it's very, very possible, but it's a different challenge than like growing a plant. It's a little bit more complicated, I would say, and probably you need to know a little bit more science or a little bit more background to be successful in growing mushrooms. It seems there seem to be a little bit more sensitive to the conditions under which you grow them. And so I think just that initial, like over a decade ago, I grew shiitake mushrooms using the PF tech. People who are new to growing mushrooms have probably heard of the PF tech. So yeah, that's how I got started. Yeah, and you brought up going to school, and that's something that I like to talk about on this podcast is the role between a traditional university or college education versus the DIY bio community. There's a place for both of them. But could you talk a little bit about what role did your formal education have versus things that you did outside of school in your learning and acquiring knowledge in bio?
Oh man, yeah, that's a super interesting question. I think, of course, like extracurriculars are the best place to learn things and apply things that you've just learned. And so I think, yeah, my education, formally or informally in biology, definitely has been guided by the hobbies and interests that I've picked up over the years, whether it's growing mushrooms or brewing or growing plants and gardening. And like lately, actually, my fascination is with my vermicompost bin. And I've actually put like sterilized grains from my mushroom projects in this bin, and what is a dead grain or should be has started growing in these vermicompost bins, and like I don't know what is going on there. It's been sterilized, and like mushroom mycelium has grown across this thing, and for some reason this grain can still germinate in the vermicompost bin. So like just things like that
What
really
is
get
a
my
what's a vermicompost bin? I'm not
oh
familiar
oh
with
my
that.
God. Yeah, okay, so this is my latest fascination. It's just like composting but with worms. And so I just ordered the worms on Amazon. It just the red wiggler worms, just got a pound of them. And you get like three monotubs, and you drill holes in the top two. You stack them and then drill holes in the top two. And the worms just slip and slide all over each other and all over your compost, and eventually just create like really rich, well, it's super rich. It's not like traditionally composted, like up to 160 degrees and nutrient breakdown and cycling. It's nothing like that. It's not a complete compost process, but like you can put your veggie scraps and like just a bunch of like,
Oh,
paper
you're putting
trimmings
them
of,
in bins. You're putting them in like the plastic storage bins. In the mushroom
yeah,
community, we call them monotubs.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
you're getting plastic bins, and those are what you're using as your compost bin.
Yeah, yeah, and it's great. And I mean, it's super cheap. I think, really anyone could do this or find materials to do this. And you come back in just a few weeks during the summer when temperatures are higher anyway, you come back in like 2 or 3 weeks, anything you put in that bin is like down to some sort of nutrient sludge.
Wow.
And you can kind of see like the little trails of like where all the worms are going and where their poop is. And like, I guess it's just castings, it just
Yeah.
turns into castings, and you can make, tea and stuff with it. I haven't done this yet. I need to get a bubbler, an aerator, and then you can kind of make like fermented teas of these microbial things for your plants. But
Wow.
anyway, that is my latest fascination, and so I'm thinking, it's just those kind of things that like really make me think like, oh wow, what is going on in this vermicompost bin versus what's going on in just a simple like potted plant versus what's going on. It's like you said, you can learn to grow all of these things and like learn the biology as you go, but then some things like stand out to you like this doesn't really match up with like the conventional biology I've been taught. Like for all intents and purposes, like the grain that I've autoclaved should be dead completely, I would think, and mycelium grown across it, and for some reason it can still germinate in those conditions. So I don't know. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's cliche, but life finds a way. I mean,
Oh yeah.
that's pretty awesome. What do you think your learning style is? Like some people learn in different ways. Some people are very much, I need to read a book, I need to memorize the facts and figures. As other people are like myself, I need to have a project that sort of drives my learning, and I need to have problems, and then I learn when I troubleshoot through the problems. What do you think your learning style is when it comes to learning biotech or anything in particular?
Yeah, I would think I was the same. Yeah, I need a project. That's what, gets my brain like super interested in what I'm working on and engaged and even just willing to solve problems and not just like shut down when there's not an answer for it available, within a Google search or something. It's like sometimes you really do have to think through things, and yeah, having a project or a reason that you're doing this, like a mission, uh, or goal, I guess, is really what drives me to learn things for sure. Yeah.
So when you talk about your formal education, what did you take away from that? Where do you think that has a place in learning when it comes to maybe someone who's thinking about a career in biotech or what they should do in their own education path?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, because ultimately I really do think that most of my learning has come from extracurricular projects, but a hybrid would be great. Like if gap year, you could like match up a gap year with like working on a farm, with taking, biology 101 that you get credit for later, no matter which university you decide to go, study at or whatever. Like, I think just having more real life opportunities to learn things in general would help a lot of people. But of course, I'm speaking from my own experience and my own learning style, and some other people, like, they get a lot from just going to lecture and sitting down and learning. And I think that's a great way to learn basics, but eventually, projects and mission and having a purpose, I think, is really important to a lot of people ultimately. And especially this year, like, I couldn't see, paying an exorbitant amount to like go to a virtual school where they're going to like tell you things that they think are going to be important for your career virtually for the next year. So, it's like, how do you make it like tangible then? Like, that's really on my mind right now. So I think, good alternatives right now for kids or students in general are just like thinking about projects that their community or their city or their whatever could use, whether it is like more soil regenerative landscaping or whatever. Man, now I'm getting really bio focused, but formal education has a place in all of this stuff, right? But ultimately it's how you apply it. So I think getting students to apply that knowledge earlier would be beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, it reminds me how when I was in high school, the most interesting classes were probably the chemistry and physics classes where the teacher was doing demonstrations at the front of the class to demonstrate the concepts. We all wanted to see the pure sodium and water reaction explode and hit the ceiling and catch things on fire.
Like hydrogen balloons and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's something to be said about modifying the education program at all levels to make it more hands-on, make it more tactile, create more of the connection between what's happening in in the actual world to the information that's being presented. I was chatting with some folks about just learning geometry or algebra. When you learn it in isolation, you have no connection to the underlying information. It's incredibly boring. But if you just go outside and you go like, hey, someone had to design the curve of that building. How would you go about like measuring the angle of that curve? Now, at least I have a connection to something physical in the physical world that I can now go into a classroom, learn the math behind that and relate it to something real in the real world. And I think that's where like a lot of people struggle with the education is they have no connection to the information. It's just like, why am I learning this? And this is really hard, and they have no connection. So they're just learning it in the abstract.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's 100% true.
Yeah. So you have a lot of, so you're currently at a lab today. Can you tell us a little bit about the place that you are working at today?
Sure. Yeah. So I work for a company called Wild Earth Inc. We make dog food and dog treats and dog supplements now as well. And so, oh, my dog's barking, actually.
That was perfect timing.
Yeah.
It's like dog treats.
Cuts a commercial, right? No. But yeah, so I work for Wild Earth Inc. We moved into a very large biotech facility last May, and we just ended up with more building than what we needed for our research and development. And so we've started renting out the additional lab space to other food tech companies or ag tech or food adjacent companies in the biotech space. And it's been really great. We have, this summer we did have 7 companies. We're down to 6 companies now, but 7, I guess, if you still include Wild Earth in the building. But it's been really fun. So right now I'm just managing the labs and making sure that all the tenants have what they need to continue their own research and development and continue growing their companies.
Do you have a sense of like, what's the startup space for biotech look like right now? Is it slowing down? Is it speeding up? What's your sense of how that's doing right now, if you even have one?
Yeah, I really don't think I have a good sense of what the space is, because it's so massive. Like every day, it's like you're hearing about more and more companies every single day. And it just, the spaces, like we used to just refer to these spaces like pharmaceutical industry, you know, like certain industries. And now it's like the lines between those industries have definitely started to blur as we're, you know, employing more synthetic biology and especially like genome editing to solve multiple problems at every stage in production. So now we're just having reactor tanks of whatever could be, it could be a cosmetic ingredient, but the precursor to it can also be anything from, you know, automotive industry to whatever, you know. So it's kind of cool how we can use biology to like solve multiple industry problems. And I think that that's like widened the space completely. Like it's hard to put a pinpoint in something like just a food tech company, because they could be also solving problems that are adjacent to other industries too. And they're, especially as a startup, they're looking for those opportunities to like beef up their revenue. So yeah, I think it's super interesting how big this space has gotten.
How are the food tech companies finding you and finding your guys' lab?
Good question. So Ryan Bethencourt is the CEO of Wild Earth, and he's pretty well known in the biotech space. So he's invested in a number of companies himself, and then was also a founder at IndieBio. So he's well known in the biotech space to begin with. And then from there, people find us through LinkedIn and other network opportunities, and I guess just by word of mouth, really.
And it's in the Oakland area?
It's in Berkeley, California.
And how competitive is that space when it comes to, you know, lab space? Is there a lot of inventory available of lab space? Is it a competitive industry?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we filled our space pretty quickly once we started, you know, opening everything up and figuring out how to do it. We're still refining how we're operating, and you know, we're not doing like bulk consumables ordering through our program right now, but you know, maybe in the future we'd offer that kind of stuff. But yeah, what we offer is pretty competitive for a small startup to just basically have a turnkey lab space to start their R&D. I think super competitive, and we offer it at a rate that other co-working places maybe can't match, or maybe they're a little bit more professional and so they cost a little bit more. And I guess that's kind of to our benefit that we haven't figured everything out, and we're very elastic, very flexible, and can meet people where they're at. So I think that's an advantage that we have.
Yeah, interesting. And what phase of the company life cycle are they approaching you? Are they pre-seed? Are they post-seed? Are they Series A? Or like at what point are they coming to you guys? And maybe you could just speak generally, when do these food tech or biotech companies, when do they go out and say, I need formal lab space, let's go and spend some money on that?
Man, yeah, I guess it's company specific. You know, they have to choose for themselves how they want to spend their money, and maybe investing in a building is something that, you know, scares, they would love to do it, but maybe scares their investors or otherwise. So, but yeah, everyone that's coming to us is pre-seed all the way to like somewhere in Series A or maybe slightly beyond Series A.
Wow. Okay. Or do you have anybody that, or are you aware of anyone that's starting like in their garage or starting at home before they get to that level?
Oh man, yeah, everyone's at home right now, right? But yeah, we have companies that are starting everywhere from like universities to people's kitchens. Like we have ex Google employee that started his company basically in his kitchen. Yeah,
Can you,
I don't know, just yeah.
can you talk about that company at all? Like, what is he working on?
Oh,
He or
sure.
she?
You know, I need to make sure that I have the story right. I don't know everyone's backgrounds that well, but yeah, Oliver Zahn at Climax. So they're making plant-based cheese or cheese alternatives.
Oh,
So,
wow.
but very cool. Yeah, I personally haven't tried their products, but everything I've heard about it is like dead on. Texture is right and flavors are right, and you know, of course, it's not hit market yet, so it's kind of hard to come by.
Yeah. And so like, I wonder, you maybe don't know this, but like how many of the food tech startups that you've worked with would you say are started by founders that are self-taught or are very connected to the DIY bio space?
Yeah, it seems like most are self-taught in some respect. Like obviously all of our founders are super brilliant people. Like they come from all walks of life, whether it's you know, chefs or construction industry or big data. We have people that come from academics, academia. And so I think, yeah, the academics tend to follow their, their typical path of research into product development. And that's like probably the most predictable path that we have for founders. But yeah, I would say actually the majority of founders they just found an interest, something that they wanted to do in the world and just chased it. And I think that's super commendable, and they are just learning every step of the process.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of that. I think even in the software world, the job is learning how to learn, because things are evolving so quickly, and that's the nature of problem solving. And starting a business, especially early on when there's so many unknowns about like who's your customer and exactly what should you be building. Those are all really difficult problems that you have to be adaptable to and be willing to pivot quickly on. Are you aware of anyone that is maybe someone non-traditional that doesn't come from an academic background that has started one of these startups and is experiencing some success?
I don't know everyone's background like in and out, so I'm sure there are, but none specifically come to mind. I know, yeah, there's some people that have come from construction industry and other backgrounds that I don't know well enough to speak on their individual background and what led them to be a founder, but I know it's not all the typical like big money finance, financial people or whatever. It would be just academia, there's nothing like that. And it doesn't seem like there's super conventional partnership or founder partnerships going on either. It's not one academic with one investor or one business person with one, science person. It seems like they kind of live in so many different worlds and just somehow, solve the puzzle for each other. So I think that that's really cool. It's not just like everyone says, like find somebody who knows the spec and find somebody who knows the business, or whatever. And I think doesn't fit the mold for us.
Yeah, and so my other question was, what's the mix of solo founders versus people coming in with co-founders?
Yeah, good question. There's a lot of solo founders out there, but usually the people coming to us are a little bit further along and they have a few people that they're working with. So we don't see a lot of solo founders. If we do, we kind of like push them to where they, their needs are at the time. Usually it's not so much space because they don't have a crew that they're working with. They're doing everything themselves, so what they need more so is like investment or some other focus. Most of the teams that we find are 2 to 3 to 4 people, like very early stage. So most companies that come to us are like 2 to 3 people and then quickly grow to like 8 to 10. But yeah, all in time, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have any insight into when you're really early? Let's say like I have an idea and I'm working on it. How do these early stage founders start and grow their team? Because there is sort of a chicken and an egg thing. Like as a solo founder, you need to get a group of people together to support your idea that sort of signals to the investment community and to potential customers that, hey, this is a viable idea. There's people that are actually wanting to work on this with me. But then you may not have much to offer to the team that you're trying to build because you're not funded yet. You have a product that's not fully developed yet. It's very much still in the idea phase. Do you have any like thoughts on how to grow that early team and build that core 3 or 4 person following that's willing to go on that journey with you?
I don't know. I haven't done it yet. I don't know. I really have no idea.
What about you personally? Would you like, if someone had an idea like that, what would it take for you to be like, I'm on board with this. I want to be in, I want to join this. I want to go on this journey with you, Mr. Founder, Mr.
Oh
and
yeah.
Mrs. Founder.
Myself, I don't really know what would draw me to that. I guess that's why I find myself connecting so many different people is because I want to help them anyway, but I'm not so immediately invested that I'm willing to, like join them and walk their specific journey. But I do want to see everyone succeed and I want to help however I can. I'm sure, maybe eventually or with my own interests, I'll find something that I'm interested in and need that critical mass, that like 3 to 4 people. I would say I'm kind of looking for it now or it's slowly finding me now. But yeah, you're right. I think it's super important to find those people early. And what's crazy is like the companies that are with us, their early 3 to 4 people are like world class. Like how would you find these people out in the world? You know,
Mm.
the resumes of these people, these founders that are coming together are like, you would never find these people in the same room in the world ever, you know, but somehow like they found each other via the internet or via their respective industries and resumes, to get together and like start something cool. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I do too. And there's something formulaic about that. And I would say for someone that is trying to start a biotech company, I'm struggling with that. I don't have a fancy pedigree. I don't have a bunch of letters after my name. And when I'm talking to VCs, as I'm currently doing, they're sending me companies that have been funded. And as you said, the founding team is, they're just beyond impressive. They have these, you know, the PhDs and MDs and people that have been in the industry for 10, 15 years. And I'm like this little guy coming in from the outsider from a completely different field, you know, and I've had some very moderate success in my past career, but nothing that sort of matches the pedigree of a lot of the funded startup companies. And so that seems to be a little bit of a headwind that I'm facing. Um, but I know that it's possible because I know at the end of the day, what the investment community cares about is like, do you have an idea that can generate a return for the investment? And so, you know, as long as you can sort of crack that nut, then I think there's potential there.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Like I'm relatively green to startup universe. I would say like I've only been in it, well, I've only worked at Wild Earth a little over 2 years now. But watching how we build things at Wild Earth, it's we kind of don't hire someone or don't uh, you grow when you need to grow. Like when you identify the problem is when you hire the next person or you need that next step. And so I think it's really interesting. Like I don't think you do need critical mass to get started, but I don't think you need like a certain portfolio of people that are going to get you going. Or investors always ask like, well, who's your tech expert or who's this or who's that? And like sometimes you don't always need that right away, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big believer too in making bets on people that think outside the box and maybe that come from non-traditional backgrounds. I guess because that's me, I have an appreciation for that, for what can be done. You need a balance, of course, of everything. It's just like when you try to self-learn anything, like I'm trying to self-learn how to do yeast engineering, how to produce psilocybin in yeast. And having a mentor is a huge time saver because I'm reading the papers and I'm being presented with just an overwhelming amount of information. A lot of it's new. And I'm not quite sure which parts of it do I need to invest a lot of time in really getting to understand, and what parts of it's like, no, you just need a cursory understanding of it, like an abstract level of understanding of it. And that's all you really need. Like, don't spend a lot of time in that area. So like, I think having, you know, like life, like, you know, nature, all things in balance can be taken into like when it comes to startups and your founding team as well. Having like complementary skill sets of people that are on the teams really important. It's not to say that you don't, like, if you have a technical company, it's not to say that you don't need that technical person, but you certainly need someone that can kind of own that and
Mm-hmm.
and bring those skills to the table. So that's kind of interesting. Um, Switching gears, so you have some experience with growing mushrooms. Maybe we could talk a little bit about like mushroom growing, because I think that's a shared passion of ours.
Sure, yeah, and we talked about it a little while, a little earlier as well. I've grown a number of species. I know you have as well, and I love learning how to grow individual species and um, different strains of the same species too can be kind of quirky. So I like, yeah, noticing all the growth differences and playing around.
Yeah, like how did you first learn about how to grow mushrooms?
Oh yeah, my origin story is definitely through psychedelics. Being in college, figuring out that you can order spore syringes to your house, that was like my first thing. And then of course PFTech, like you said, you started with PFTech. I think pretty much everyone does until you want to invest in a pressure cooker anyway. And yeah, PFTech worked somehow, and I like somehow even did some other stuff like bags of manure like very early on that I had boiled for like ungodly amounts of time, like 4 to 6 hours, and like just, you know how you kind of, you look back and you're like, how did that work? You know, that was how my mushroom growing career started.
Did you find that like when you started growing, because I just, every single time I see mushrooms fruit, no matter what it is, in an artificial environment, it's still magical to me. Like when I go check on my mushrooms, it's still like, whoa, it's cool to see, because you just don't see it very often. And then when you are learning how to grow mushrooms, you are saturated with images and videos.
Oh, yeah.
And it just like when you finally get to actualize it and see a mushroom fruit body, I'm still blown away by that. Do you have a similar experience with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I love like seeing the pins, and then day by day, like seeing how quickly they grow. I think even more than flowers. I mean, watching blooms is really cool too. But of course, it's over weeks or months or whatever it is, and or every other year or something. You know, like botany is kind of boring compared to mycology. Like you just wait till it dumps rain, and then like overnight mushrooms. Like nothing is as quick as that. You know, as far as I know. So yeah, I love watching it. It's like magic, and I think we've talked about this before, but like being able to grow your own food, of course, growing your own garden is like a really, really cool thing, but adding mushrooms into the mix, like really just kind of twists your brain to what's possible, like as far as growing your own food and creating your own food agriculture systems at a small scale. I think if more people understood mushroom growing, like we'd be living in a different world.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? Can you expound on that? Like, what benefits do you think come from even just the act of growing mushrooms, which I find to be therapeutic mentally, like just to be a farmer, if you will?
Sure. I think, well, in Western culture, right, like it's pretty well known that we're like all pretty mycophobic, but I think that there's a power to being able to like harness what some people would consider to be like a mold, and then making food out of that. Like that's so cool. Especially corn. You know the corn story?
No.
Oh yeah. Okay. So corn, at least as I've come to know it, I don't know if this is all factual, right? But corn, like the popular mycoprotein, it was discovered, I want to say in the UK, but it was discovered as like a tomato smile, you know, and it was just like
Wait,
what?
wait, let me break that down, because you said a bunch of stuff that I still don't understand.
Yeah,
Corn is a mycoprotein?
yeah, corn. Okay, the QUORNE, or no, QUORN, the product. It's a brand.
Oh, okay. We're not talking about the yellow corn that grows on
No, no,
stalk.
no.
Oh, okay. So I've
Yeah,
never heard of this brand. So, okay.
yeah.
I'm not familiar with corn with a Q.
Yeah, I think it still has egg whites or some kind of egg proteins in it as well. So it's not vegan, of course. You know, I'm like
It's a
privy to that
protein
world.
substitute, I guess.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It's an alternative protein, but it's been around for a long time. It's been around, I want to say since like the 70s or something.
Okay.
It was, man, this is super interesting. Just like the background of industrial fermentation is so interesting. Like I think,
Educate us, because I
do
don't know
we
anything
want
about
to
it.
get into? Okay,
Yeah,
I do
why
not
not?
know. I don't know enough about this to even get
I mean, share
started,
what you
really.
know. You know more than I do.
Well, I just read it from, well, the other sources, right? Michael Pollan and like Guns, Germs, and Steel, and like these books that kind of have like a holistic view of like how we got to where we are. And then of course I kind of fill in the gaps for myself. But um, for me, I think the way that I see things, like industrial fermentation started with the Haber-Bosch process, you know, like mid-century, 20th century, harnessing nitrogen from the air. And it's like how we created bombs, but it's how we can also create fertilizer. And so we as like a species, we're choosing like which path do we want to walk, you know, like warfare revolution or green revolution. And I think we kind of dabbled in both worlds and have kind of ended up with some kind of hybrid, but we're still faced with where do we want to go from here. And so like industrial fermentation, once we realized that you can make fertilizer out of this stuff, it was like, well, why do you need the fertilizer for the plants? Let's just make let's make yeast, let's make mycoproteins, like let's grow the protein directly from the tank instead of having to grow the fertilizer to grow the food in the field. I think we're just continually figuring out shortcuts to the same end somehow. So that's how I understand the current state of fermentation. But anyway, yeah, what it comes back to, so industrial fermentation like sought to feed the world without needing so much farmland, especially like after war-stricken areas were completely, you know, ravaged of all their available food sources. People started like fermenting yeasts like as food instead of just as this product of beer. It also had a food purpose, and then corn somehow came up out of that, and it was a tomato smut, just like something that was rotting tomatoes in the garden, and they decided to throw it in a tank, and then eventually created a specialized tank for it, and now it feeds like so many people, which I think is cool.
That's really cool. And like you have a lot of food tech companies that are now customers at this lab, and a lot of them, as I understand, are working on alternative protein sources. How much of those processes involves fermentation?
Yeah, good question. Most of them involve fermentation at some point, I would say, whether it's just doing a starter culture or, you know, plates, finding things, you know, doing genetic engineering. Like fermentation is involved at some point in pretty much everybody's work, I would say. But as far as fermentation being the process that yields the product, only a few companies are directly using, you know, like large scale fermentation to create their product at this time.
I should probably know this, but what is fermentation really? Like, how do you describe? Like, is it using an organism and putting it in an environment where it can, like a nutrient-rich environment, and then just allowing it to propagate within that environment? I don't know. Like, is it? Or does it only involve like one specific or two specific organisms? I should probably look up what a formal definition of fermentation is. But all I know is that you can put yeast in a big batch of different nutrients, carbon sources, and whatnot, and the yeast will eat the sugars and eat the different carbon sources, and then it will secrete whatever protein's been engineered to do, or just left alone, just alcohol,
Yeah.
which is what regular yeast just naturally produces. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So I was wondering if you would be open to talking more about like the psychedelics aspect of it and some of the experiences you have, because I haven't really gotten a chance to talk a lot about what led me to create EverymanBio, but it was in part having a profound psychedelic experience.
How many?
Well, it just took one, and it's not,
wow.
and it was a challenge, and it's not necessarily something I'm looking to run back and do again. Although I have such tremendous respect and reverence for the experience that obviously I feel very passionate about more people getting the opportunity to have it. Yeah. But people who've had or who've taken a significant or gone on a significant trip can attest to the challenge of the journey and the reticence to go back to it again in a very short period of time. Have you had a big, like a large dose trip?
Oh yeah, certainly.
You're like, oh yeah. Like, I don't know, maybe totally. Like I know that there's stories of people who can do this all the time. I'm pretty weak when it comes to that stuff. So
yeah, I think my relationship with psychedelic mushrooms kind of oscillates. Some weeks I just microdose once, some weeks I'll microdose a few times, some weeks I microdose and then I'll eat a dose at the end of the week. I have no idea. But you know, now it's like slowed down a lot. I think when it started, it was like recreational, and so it was fun. And hey, man, you want to eat these mushrooms with me and go, whatever, take a hike or whatever it would be. You know, it's kind of like that's how it found me. And so it started out more recreational and less purpose driven, and that was okay. Like I think I needed that, honestly, because like I was so wound up in my own little ball, like mentally, I really wasn't looking for like any spiritual guidance or anything, you know, I was like looking for a fun time. And so the mushrooms met me where I needed to be met, I think, because then eventually then maybe you eat mushrooms on a night that you shouldn't, and you have like way too introspective of a night. Like I think that's what happened to me one night, is like I just had an extra gram or two, and I was like, oh yeah, you know, this will be fun. I'll eat a gram or two and just watch some TV and go to bed. And like, whoa, yeah, I ended up like, you know, watching the news and being like way too tripped out about real life, and like needing to take a shower, like having one of those nights where, or one of those trips. I don't know if you've had that, but like,
That's my best way to trip, is actually to sit in the shower and let the warm water just come
oh
over
yeah,
me. Yeah, because then I can close my eyes and just be in my mind.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that can be a good and a bad thing.
yeah, totally. Man, I've had a couple of those challenging trips, you know, where like no position is comfortable, and you're like, you need to
Yeah.
shower, and then you put on clothes, and you're like, it's too cold, or I'm too warm, or I'm too hungry, or I'm too, you know, that's always like something.
Yeah.
Um, but for some reason, it's like when you feel the most uncomfortable is when your mind is like the most willing to bend too. So I think there is that theme of like no bad trips, you know, like it's all might be uncomfortable, but there's something constructive coming from there.
Yeah, it's like when you're yeah, I agree with that. Even on a challenging trip, when you come out of it, you there is something you take away from it. If nothing else, what I've taken away is just more humility, that I'm not really in control of as much stuff as I thought I was.
Oh man, yeah, totally. I think that that's a journey. Like as soon as you eat the dose, it's like, where am I going? You know, like you don't exactly know, and like,
And you have
um,
to give into it. Otherwise, if you try to fight it, you're going to be in trouble.
oh yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that's something that in, you know, in the perspective of where humans are at in their evolution and in all of time, we have it the best we've ever had it. I mean, the amount of poverty in the world is at an all-time low. I mean, most people in the world have access to cell phones, instant communication. We have access to just all the information we want. We have it the best we've ever had it, you know, relative to all of history. And I think that lends itself to we we get too comfortable. And I'm really speaking for myself, and this is just my opinion. But I think we get so comfortable, we're not really challenged like maybe we were 100 years ago, where we had to grow our own food, where we just didn't have as much access to the comforts of modern living today. And I think that contributes towards the buildup of your ego and this idea that we have a lot more influence over what happens in the world around us. In some sense, because we live in a politically divisive time right now. Maybe I just kind of hypothesize that's a product of our current time. It's like we don't have a lot of other real. Everybody has challenges in life, but compared to human history, we don't have the same kinds of challenges. So we get into these sort of idea wars with each
yeah,
other. Whereas like it used to be, we're all trying to make sure our crop doesn't fail this year. And that
yeah,
would be the equalizer, right? Like we don't, like I really don't care who you're voting for, your politics, because we're both trying to make sure our crop doesn't fail this year.
yeah. I think that's 100% right. I mean, it just goes back to being very purpose driven and mission driven. And I think psychedelics kind of point out to you like your place in the universe, where maybe you were okay with it before, like you grew up, you went to school, you studied accountant, like how to be an accountant, and you, or CPA or whatever, you know, you get whatever you need. I'm just like being hypothetical, right? But like
Oh,
it's easy to fall into the system, and then just like somehow end up in a career or end up in a life that you're living. And I think psychedelics like do us this solid favor of like waking us up and being like, you realize you're still in this spot, right? Like, where do you want to go from here? And I think that that is like the value that they've brought to my life for sure. But I think that they could do that for a lot of other people. And I think you're 100% right that we create these like idea wars based on where you're at in your life instead of having that fundamental like reckoning with like where you're at in your life, you know. We like construct our narratives based on where we're at instead of like where we should be, or however that goes, you know.
Yeah. And like, I wonder also for you, have you ever had an experience from a trip? Like, does anything jump out in your mind where you had a trip and you're like, I learned this about myself, or I learned this about the world? Is there anything, like, I can talk about some of the things that I learned and what I experienced, but I'm curious to hear if you've got any of those keystone moments from a trip that you brought back with you that had a real impact on your life afterwards.
Yeah, you're looking for like my personal like 10 commandments or something, but
No, not necessarily 10 commandments or anything like that, but like, well, I'll share with you like one of mine.
Sure, yeah.
Like when I had this first, and truthfully was I haven't had one that big of a trip. I haven't taken that large of a dose since. And that was my first one. But the big thing that I took away was the realization of how disconnected I had become to other people and the world around me. And when I came out of it, and now when I reflect on it, it completely changed my perspective about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I realized that so much of what I was doing in my own life was coming from a place of fear, like, and I also realized that fear of whatever it is, we all experience different fears and anxieties in life because that's part of being alive. Yeah. Fear fundamentally scaffolds up to the fear of death. We experience fear as a way of protecting ourselves from the ultimate thing to fear, which is death itself. Mm-hmm. And so when I had this big trip, I was confronted with the idea of my death. And because you experience the complete loss of your ego, and you even the part that's really challenging is you start to worry, like, oh no, is it always going to be like this? And so you really have to surrender to the process and to like what's happening, and just kind of trust that it's going to be okay and it will eventually end.
This is your first trip?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a deep one.
So, and it was about 14 hours long.
Yeah.
So it was very long. And so I came out of it like realizing, one, that I was woefully disconnected from nature and the world around me and people. And I was also living a life where all my decisions were to protect myself from the underlying fears that I had. And once you confront the fear of death, since all other fear and anxiety in your life scaffolds up to the fear of death, if you can address the fear of death, then it lessens all of the other fears that you have, because like that's what they scaffold up to. So, yeah. I kind of walked, like, for me, that was like the big takeaway that I walked away from. And again, I've gotten better at developing a narrative of how to actually explain this, because
the integration.
It's very, people that have had a significant trip will tell you that the experience transcends words. And
always.
I was the day after, I was very quiet, because I'm like, it was so profound. I didn't even want to try to describe it because it would do it injustice.
Do you think you experienced like a high during that trip though, or?
Well, what do you mean by that? Definitely I experienced an altered consciousness when I looked at different things. I definitely saw, wavy patterns and fractals on the wall and things like that. But the thing that I learned on the topic of hallucinations and seeing things, when I would hear other people talking about a trip and seeing things, that scared me, because it made me feel like, oh no, you're going to go through something that, like, what if something terrifying shows up and you don't have any control over that? What I realized, like, I was aware that when I looked at my tile, which has a weird pattern, that it was moving. And so I wasn't like fearful of that, because I'm like, it was more like I was looking at myself, looking at it like, oh,
Mm,
I'm looking at the tile. It's moving. That's
mm.
interesting. That's an effect of the drug that I'm currently on. So I'm
Yeah,
like having this conversation with myself. It's not like, and I wasn't fearful of it because I'm like, oh, okay.
yeah. I'm the wrong person to ask, I guess, like as far as, oh man, for first times, like I don't do first time first times very well as far as drugs. I always get like way too anxious. Like what's gonna happen? What am I looking for? Like when's it gonna start? You know, like all that stuff. So my first times are like actually not super memorable. I know that it was very intense. Like I ate like 5 grams of mushrooms and like watched ceiling tiles like kind of stack and fall and like that kind of thing. And I remember having like really profound thought loops, but it was just so profound that like I couldn't get a handle on it at all. I did
Mm.
zero integration from my first trip, like 100% zero integration. But yeah, I like, man, like we were talking about before, just these learnings that you have are sometimes like right under your nose like the whole time. And so like some of the biggest ones that I've had are like, um, well, studying biology, it's like we are all from the same family tree of life. And like, but being on mushrooms and thinking about that, and then like looking at a tree and looking at a blade of grass, or like, you know, looking at birds flying and being like, that is literally me. That is me, like separated by hundreds of millions of years. Like that just like blows my mind every time that I think about that while I'm on psilocybin. And so like I think if anything that's taught me to like definitely reinforce like the golden rule and like doing well unto others and maybe not trying to eat less meat, that kind of stuff. So I don't know if those are like the just kind of stereotypical like hippie vibes that people pick up from these kinds of substances or not, but
Well,
those are
I,
like I've learned.
yeah, those are, it's interesting you say that because there are stereotypes associated with psychedelic
Mm,
use because we see like the images that media puts out about people who purportedly do them, like the hippie
yeah,
thing. But
burnouts and
yeah, but that's a very limited view of what's actually happening. And I don't think I would meet anyone who would say that being more connected to nature or to each other and to our humanity is a bad thing.
yeah.
And I think there's definitely more work to be done to educate people about like what this thing is. And I think that's part of my mission on this journey that I'm on, which I don't know where it's going to end up, but um, I guess I will also say is like when I hope it's okay that I'm sharing. I'm kind of
Oh
doing
yeah,
a lot
no,
of the
please,
talking.
of course, this is great. Yeah, good conversation.
But the other big takeaway that I took from the big trip was, man, how much more would I get out of this if I had had a guide who could help
Mm,
guide my thoughts? Because what I find is my brain gets lit up and I can think about really abstract concepts and ideas at a level that I don't have access to off of psilocybin.
mm.
So like I have the I'm such a nerd, but like that's the time for me to crack open the theory of relativity and the Mandelbrot set and um, like some really like machine learning and AI. That's kind of the time for me to learn those things
Wow, yeah.
because I have access to something that I don't normally have access to. But the problem is the brain is moving around so quickly that it's like I keep making these connections to like I'll learn something and my brain gets excited and then immediately wants to move on to something else. So it's kind of hard to stay focused in the one area. And I kept having this feeling of like if I had someone who had been here before to guide me and sort of help me go down a path that like what sort of discoveries about myself that would I be able to like bring back with me and share to the world when I'm out of this? Does that
Yeah.
resonate at all with you? Like, have you ever had anything like that?
Oh man, yeah. I've never had a guide actually for any of my psilocybin trips.
Me either.
But I would like to. And actually, I should just quickly tell this story. Like one of the most profound plant healing or plant medicine experiences I've ever had was actually at a cannabis circle, and it was a conscious cannabis guided meditation. And we met up in SF, and it was like, I think it was just like a put on by a local yoga class or something, but there was this guy who came from Boulder who was a specialist in this. I forget his name now, but anyway, super profound. Like we all sat down, and like, I've smoked weed tons of times, right? Like everyone smoked weed. Come on, man. Like roll up a joint with your friends and whatever, get high and eat stuff. I don't know. Like everyone has this like certain connotation of what weed does to you and how you behave on it and what you should do on it or what is normal behavior. And this night completely like threw a wrench in my previous relationship with cannabis because well, let me just start over from the beginning. So I was smoking too much weed, wasn't really experiencing the effects that I wanted. And so I knew I needed a tolerance break, and I knew I was going to like do this thing in 2 weeks. And so I stopped smoking weed for 2 weeks, and maybe, I guess I was kind of detoxing. I was working out a little bit. I always do, but maybe when you can't smoke weed at night, you like do a couple extra push-ups at night or something. Anyway, so I hadn't smoked weed for 2 weeks. I went to this thing. Usually I smoke by myself or with 1 or 2 other close friends. I'm not like a super social smoker. But there was like 15 or 16 other people in this room, and we all brought our own pieces and our own material. And I had cleaned my pipe before I went. And but yeah, anyway, you consume, like you basically say a prayer, and then you consume all together. And then we like laid down on mats that were provided with like blindfolds that were provided. And the first 30 minutes was kind of like a guided meditation. And then it turned into like music after that. It was kind of like guided music journey after that. And with breath work, if you wanted to kind of like did the breathing patterns early on. And then if you wanted to continue it, you could. And I chose to, because I like breath work and stuff. But man, I was like the highest I'd ever been. Oh my God. Like, I don't know what it was about that experience. It was just so in tune with what the medicine can do in your brain. Like my thinking pattern was just completely crazy. And I can't even remember like what the guided meditation was, but I know at a certain point, he just like said something that like resonated with me. And it was like, take all of your anxiety, like everything that you're feeling right now, like imagine you just had a place to put it. Like that was how it happened. And like in my mind, being stoned at this point, it was like I had a place to put this stuff, like, whoa, I'm here in the moment, like meditating, and it was just super healing. Yeah, I don't know, that was super profound, but I would like to experience that same thing but with psilocybin for sure.
That's amazing. Yeah, first of all, yoga is just a wonderful thing to meditate. I find it meditative in the first place.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if you've done hot yoga. And that sounds like the cliche LA thing. Goat yoga and hot yoga.
Yeah. I have not done hot yoga. No.
But hot yoga is great because you're in the dark. You're like in a dark, or the way that I've done it, you're in a completely dark room with a bunch of other people with some meditative music. You have a guide that's leading the session, and you're doing these things. Like, I'm not the most flexible guy at all.
Yeah.
So I'm already pushing myself. But yeah, so there's something just incredibly meditative about it. But I think when you told me that story, it made me think about like the power of intention in our consciousness. Because like if we want to do anything to change our behavior, we have to do it with intention. We have to pay attention to it. And these tools, these drugs, are tools that sort of facilitate that openness and the intention, I think. And I'm really interested in the underlying neurobiology behind the mechanisms that make that work. Even alcohol, which I don't drink, and I haven't drank in maybe 13, 14 years.
Nice, but good for you.
I have plenty of vices, but thankfully that's not one of them. I also don't drink coffee, which makes me even more of an outlier. But alcohol does play a role as a social lubricant in society as well. Perhaps I would even argue too much, because when you stop drinking, you realize how much every social interaction seems to revolve around alcohol at some point.
Oh man, it's so true. Yeah, you like it's in our vernacular. You know, you say like go grab a coffee, go grab a beer, like before when you really just mean like let's have a good conversation, right? Like let's get to know each other or something. But,
Yeah. Well, and I've worked at companies before where that's also the way that that's the mechanism they use to connect people. And I'm like,
mm,
well, I don't drink. So that sort of that makes it a little bit more difficult for me to connect with people because everybody around me is drinking and, connecting and their defenses, but I'm still me. So there's an argument to be said about trying to find ways to connect with each other without needing some sort of lubricant. But anyways, the intention part I think is interesting. And I think that that's also where the guide, like you had this really powerful experience
mm,
in part, I think, because one, when you were with other people, so you were connected to the people that were around you. You weren't just in isolation by yourself. And there's an energy there, not a woo-woo energy, but there's a real like sort of, flow of energy between the people and everybody's brain. And you have the leader that's sort of bringing the intention, the focus for everybody into one place. And I think like that's why I'm passionate about the potential for psychedelics in treating mental health in the future, is that I I think having an experience under a trained clinician is going to offer just a wealth of opportunity and experience for healing for people, because we grow through our experiences. Our experiences are also what hurt us and what kind of can create fear and anxiety and avoiding people. But the only way to reverse that is with positive experiences as well. And I think with psychedelics, it gives you not a shortcut, but it certainly
yeah, it seems like a shortcut.
it's a little bit of a shortcut. It accelerates the potential for you to have an experience that can undo some of the patterns that you've developed in your consciousness. I don't know. It's just something that I'm working out in my own mind of how it works. And
Yeah, I think that's true. You know, what's crazy? I think like, well, like in my own story, it met me where I needed to be, you know. I started taking mushrooms recreationally and then like I said, I had one of those trips where I ate too much on the wrong night or something, and it turned out to be like an uncomfortable experience that turned into a massively positive experience. And like we're talking about hot yoga and like these other things that are like kind of like putting yourself in this weird uncomfortable position to like see past your current situation or whatever it is to like gain deeper insight. And I think that's super powerful. And yeah, you need to have intention to do that. Like you need to show up to the yoga class, you need to eat those mushrooms, you need to you know, whatever it is. But the cool thing about mushrooms though is I don't think that your intention always needs to be super defined. Like it's good to have an intention, right?
the
But
intention could just be, I'm going to be open to the experience.
yeah,
I
yeah,
find that
that's
if you
so
go in
true.
there with like, I have made the mistake of, I'm going to take these and I want to solve these problems.
Oh yeah,
Oh no,
yeah.
it told me right away that no. That was your
Uh,
plan. No. That's not what we're working on today.
yeah, yeah. I've done that too. I've like, well, I want to specifically think about these things, and it's like, no.
No, no.
That's so funny.
The fact that you thought you could do that
Yeah.
is what you needed to work on.
Yeah, oh man. But yeah, I think you're right. It's like all you have to do is be open to the experience. And I think that's what's so cool about mushrooms is like people that are otherwise just looking for a good time can eat these things and like have a life-changing experience. And maybe they're not always ready for it. And like that, I think people could do a little better at advocating for being prepared for these kinds of journeys and things. You know, so many
Yeah.
people just kind of say like, oh, you know, oh, it's as toxic as water. Like psilocybin is non-toxic. It's, you know, it's not going to kill you, but it's massively powerful, right? So
Very
like,
powerful.
and same thing with THC. It's like it's not going to kill you, but like some people might react like very poorly. So I do preach caution like at every turn, you know, especially with people that are like on certain prescriptions or have certain, you know, mental situations that they're working with as well. So I think caution is like the first place to start. But of course, if you eat a little bit and your body's like okay with it, like I
Less
don't
is
see,
more. Plus,
Yeah.
you don't have to start with a big dose either. Like if you want to experiment, work your way up.
Yeah.
It's better to do it that way.
Yeah. And I think that that helps like the, maybe like the terrified beginner too. That's like, well, am I going to lose control of my mind? It's like, well, probably not. But one good way to ensure that you don't is don't eat that big of a dose.
Yeah.
um, I don't know. Not everyone needs to like do the 5 grams in darkness for their first trip, like just maybe eat a gram and go hang out, go to the park, like go throw a frisbee. Um, you don't have to have these like totally life-changing experiences right away.
That's so important too, because you're absolutely right. As psychedelics become more mainstream and the folklore around it begins to like disseminate throughout culture, there does, and I see this with people, is there is an expectation of something life-changing if I just
Mm,
take this one time, and it's just really not how it works, and it's also why like wherever EverymanBio goes, like hopefully it's something that uses psychedelics in some way. I'm trying to figure out the
mm,
business model,
yeah.
but I completely agree. I think it's incredibly powerful. I would be okay if at least there's, how should I say this? I'm an advocate of it being done in a somewhat controlled setting with experienced people that are administering it, especially for new people that are doing it with the intention of having a healing experience.
Mm.
I just think that that's the best way to optimize your chances of it being something positive. Now, does
Decreases
mean
liability too.
yeah. Well, I also think it would be interesting to study it because I think intellectually, I'm just interested in understanding what's happening in the brain chemistry.
Mm.
Because if we could figure out what's happening with psychedelics at the brain level, it might change our view of and our understanding of what consciousness is. And
Mm.
that's still very much an unknown in the world of science is what is consciousness and how does it emerge? It's an emergent property. How does it emerge from these neurons, which are just made of the same elements in the table of elements? Like, how is it that you can arrange these elements in the right way and it creates this experience of consciousness?
Oh my gosh.
That is mind blowing to me. And I think psychedelics, because they offer an insight into an altered consciousness or a way to introspect your own consciousness, that it may be a tool that we've not fully yielded yet to be able to answer some of those questions. That's incredible to me because consciousness is everything. It's how we view the world around us.
Yeah. Well, that's why I kind of asked you before, like when you were telling me about your first trip, is I asked like, did you experience a high during that? And I mean, of course, like you're inebriated, right? But like, are you on a like emotional high or?
No, I didn't experience a high. It's such a loaded word too. We'd have to break
Yeah.
down like what does high mean, because when I think of high, sometimes I think like if I smoke weed with friends and we're all kind of like laughing and joking around and like a party kind of environment. That's kind of a high to me. Like there's
Mm.
definitely a feel good aspect of it, but how much of that is the drug and how much of that is just I'm with people that I'm really comfortable with and we're having a good
Yeah.
time. I didn't experience that with mushrooms, but
Mm.
there is I guess they call it a glow that happens on the come down, like
Mm.
right when it's completely about to exit your system. It's almost like you've been electrified and finally someone cut the electricity off. So there's like this sense of like relief, like this weight off of you.
Mm.
That I would consider kind of a high because it was like, it's like you just ran a marathon and right, you just crossed the finish line.
Oh yeah.
Now you can rest your legs. You can get something to drink. You can like,
Oh man, yeah, that's so true.
you just like, whoa, I just finished this roller coaster.
Man, yeah. I've
So
never really thought about it that way, but yeah, like a trip, like a good trip can totally be like a marathon. Like by the end of it, you're like, I need water. I need, like I need to lay down. I need to go to sleep.
I need to process this. Like,
Oh man, that's
whoa.
funny.
I always find myself to be very, almost like a monkish. Like I just want to put on a robe, walk
Oh, yeah.
around quietly and just reflect, because I'm just so humbled by the space warp,
Yeah.
tunnel that I just went through.
I like the word glow for it too, the like sense of internal peace or something. I feel that too, definitely towards the end.
It's like I just went to battle and now I have this new appreciation for the life that I have. It's
Oh yeah.
like that, I don't know, that's my experience. Like, whoa, I like whatever I was worried about for, I wish it lasted all the time. Like, I wish I could stay in that
Oh
sort
yeah.
of serenity and peace, all the time, because inevitably life starts to creep back up, and I probably do for another for another significant trip. But I do remember afterwards just having this serenity and peace over me, where I really wasn't fearful about anything. All the things that I was worried about, I was like, they don't really matter.
What about the next day though? Like,
No, kind of, it's gone away. But the experience is still with me,
yeah.
and I'm still trying to figure out how to talk about it and what it means. I carry it with me for sure, but I'm not
Yeah.
feeling any physical effects. Do you feel something different the next day?
Not typically, no. I guess some days, but it depends on how I treat myself while I'm tripping or whatever too, you know. You eat a couple grams and go for a hike and maybe your legs hurt and you're a little thirsty after, a little dehydrated or something. You got to take care of yourself like while you're tripping, I think is like the moral of this story. Because sometimes like people go to a festival and they eat a bunch of mushrooms and the next day they wake up and they're like, oh, I felt great last night. I feel so bad. It's like, well, did you drink any water? Did you eat a good meal? You know, those kinds of things. But at a certain point, like I do think it's really interesting to study. It's kind of like MDMA or something, where is there like some kind of like synapse overload, and then the next day there's like, uh, like a decreased supply of certain neurotransmitters or something, like, or even, yeah, psilocybin itself, maybe not toxic, right? But like, is there what kind of effects does it have long term? I think we should characterize that stuff as far as it goes for safety. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I personally, I can't separate like the biochemistry from the experience. So like I do feel a high. Like when I'm on the mushrooms, I feel a high. I feel like this energy I didn't have. I feel like this stimulation that wasn't there before. And then the next day I'm like so overwhelmed by the experience that maybe there is a little bit of a low, but I don't know if it's just an
Oh,
experiential low or
interesting.
if it is just like, if it's actually biochemical or some kind of neurochemistry, some kind of synapse thing going on, or I can't separate that from the experience. Like the experience itself is so overwhelming that like, of course, the next day I'm like a little drained or something. It's like you ran a marathon or whatever. But I would like to know more about the neurochemistry of it and how that pertains to the experience and how that pertains to set and setting. Because like maybe, I don't know, like you were saying, it would be good to do all this stuff in clinical settings, but like not everyone has access to that and it's hugely expensive. And to regulate that is kind of maybe inaccessible to most people. But yeah, if we could maybe put a finer point on some of these things that cause, some of these conditions that cause whatever it would be, anxiety or bad trips, for lack of a better term. If we could figure that out, more people could have access to this safe medicine without all of the structure. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And different people experience it differently. And I think the reason why we need to characterize these things is because we talked about the language being limited in its ability to explain what's happening. And it's such a subjective experience that plays out in the mind that's very difficult to measure. And so one of the ideas that I'm sort of bantering around is maybe like a Center for Psychedelic Research and Treatment here in LA. Like, what would happen if we created an actual center of knowledge where we have experts come in under a single roof, and people can actually come in, they can get a consultation, they can get a treatment under a guide in a proper setting. They maybe get their blood and their vitals taken beforehand and after, so that those sort of things can be measured. I would love to see a center like that where it's being researched. Maybe several trials are being run there. So that's something I'm looking into as well, because I just think LA is especially one. We have a lot of people that I think could really use those kinds of treatments.
Sure.
I just think there's a lot of things. I think there's an openness to alternate forms of medicine like that you maybe wouldn't find in other places. Although
Yeah.
there's other headwinds in California too. It's just very expensive and difficult to have any kind of business here. But yeah, that's something it's a vision I have. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a place in the world for that, whether it's LA or otherwise. I think LA, you're right. It's like equal parts cutting edge and style, and then also kind of that like woo-woo, crystals and crushed velvet and, or crushed felt hats. And, you know what I mean?
And that
Like,
stuff is such a turnoff to me, but
really?
it's just not like it's a turnoff to me, but I get it now. I get why people are drawn to it.
Yeah, it's like what is
I don't hate on it.
New Age alchemy, right? That's kind of like
Yeah.
the whole thing, like crystals and like extracts and healing tonics and medicinal herbs and like I don't hate on any of that stuff, right? Like
Yeah, I don't
especially
either.
if it works, like who cares if it's
If it
placebo
works,
or
who
not?
cares? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But I think you're right. There should be a place in the world where there is some kind of science being attached to this, even if it's just like for visibility too. I think like if you went and you had like your vitals taken before you take a mushroom trip, it like maybe that's kind of like reinforcing to some people that like, hey, we care about your well-being. Like this isn't just that like back alley dispensary style of
No, that's exactly what I'd want it to be. I'd want real medical doctors there who are
yeah.
and real neuroscientists and people that are really interested in looking at the brain, looking at the body chemistry, and kind of like, yes, we're facilitating the psychedelic experience, but we're also like trying to quantify what's actually happening in the body biologically. That to
Yeah.
me is where my focus is, because I think that's fascinating. I actually think that's also going to be the thing that breaks psychedelics into more of the mainstream, because then we can look at the quantifiable science and say like, we know these compounds have these effects and at these dosages, this is what you can sort of expect. And perhaps, I've talked about like the problem we have with mental health treatment today is people just want a magical pill to solve it. But that's not how dysregulation in the brain works. And when you take an antidepressant, it's a sort of blunt tool that works over the entire brain. It's not a scalpel that goes into your specific problem area and fixes it. It's a generic blunt tool. And it's probably why it doesn't really work. It's one of the most prescribed medicines in the West, but all of the indicators around mental health continue to decline, or I should say continue to increase. The number of diagnoses goes up, suicidality is going up, drug use is going up. And there's a lot of different factors into that, but you could also argue that the number one treatment options we have clearly aren't working because they continue to rise, but so do the diagnoses. And the comorbidities associated with those. So I just think there's a real need for alternate treatments. And I think this isn't a cure by any means, but definitely something worth pursuing and definitely something humans have been using for thousands of years. And it's worth us doing the science to dig into that.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, yeah, thousands of years we've had this history with psychedelics, and maybe just in the last couple hundred years that people have taken like a bad view of those effects, and I think that that's like definitely a shame, because the way that it is right now, it's Schedule 1, so there's no accepted medical use, and of course there's MAPS that's trying to define things and how it can be used for mental afflictions and conditions and diseases and whatever, but it does get pigeonholed there, and that's kind of sad to me, because I think it's a safe enough compound that we could have more broad use of it and find more uses if it was used more broadly. Who knows? Like maybe there's somebody with like some kind of ear, nose, and throat pressures going on, and it like relieves their inner ear pressure, and like we would never know because we've only been investigating it for depression, and so until somebody with the inner ear issue and depression finds themselves in a study, we're not even going to realize these new medical uses for things, which I think is a huge disservice. Like if we're really trying to kind of like characterize this thing and validate it as a medicine, like we need to try it in more outlets than just a single, you know, pigeonholed outlet. And that speaks to me like really personally because I have a nerve injury. So I would love to couple like psilocybin with lion's mane or something that may, you know, cause like measurable nerve regrowth. I would love that. That would be my dream.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it brings up this whole other topic around just drug discovery in general, you know, because psilocybin, MDMA, LSD have all relatively recently been issued as breakthrough medicines by the FDA, while at the same time they're viewed as Schedule 1 drugs.
Yeah.
So like under strict licensing, they're being used for the clinical trials, but they're not broadly available yet. But I think it's a worthy debate that our society and culture should be continuing to have, which is the sort of trade-off between the safety that we get from the regulatory process and the need to be able to be innovative and to have autonomy over trying things that might work for us. And it's, you know, it's a worthwhile debate, I think, that we all play out amongst ourselves. And I think it's worth having. And I don't think it's completely either or. Like, I think there's incredible things about our medicine and the system that we have that's created medicine for the world. A lot of the innovation for healthcare comes from the United States. So there's something that works about it, but there's also something to be said about, you know, some of us are okay with being guinea pigs for trying things on ourselves. And what should those limits be? You know, I don't know. I don't have that fully worked out myself, but that's something that I would love to speak to someone who's thought about it a lot more than I have. I definitely think there are some cases, especially, I think there was some legislation that was signed this past year too, that allowed people who were at the end of their life to try medicines that weren't prior approved. So that's awesome. Like I'd like to see more of those kinds of things happen, because if you already have terminal cancer, then why wouldn't, and you've tried everything else, then if you're ready and willing to try the next thing, even if it might kill you, you should be able to have a say in that. You should be able to do that.
Yeah.
So, well, man, just to close this thing up, what's next for you? Like, where are you headed in career? What are you focused on? Where do you think you want to go in the near term?
Sure. I like what I'm doing at Wild Earth now, running Cell Valley Labs. I like that. It's fun. I've been learning a lot, but I think eventually, either professionally or just in personal projects, I do need to get back to the bench more. I need to get doing my own science again. Kind of tailed off during COVID, tailed off during summer. So maybe during the winter when light is a little less available and I'm not so tempted to go lay in the sun or something, I can find myself at the lab bench. But yeah, I have a number of mycology projects that I'd like to be working on, and even some businesses that I'd like to spin up to support the burgeoning myco industry that we're going to see, you know, especially in psychedelics.
That's very cool, man. And so I opened this up with saying that you're the ultimate connector. If people want to get a hold of you, maybe you want to share your Instagram or your contact information?
Sure. Yeah. My Instagram handle is probably the best place to find me both personally and professionally. I kind of live between both worlds there. It's at Fun Guy of the World. Fun Guy, like a fun person, not like fungi or, you know, otherwise mushrooms. It's not that. It's Fun Guy, fun person of the world, or Fun Guy of the World, like that. So that's my handle. And then, yeah, that's a good place to find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook somewhere. I haven't seen it in years, but I'm out there. You know, that's what's crazy, is like, you don't run into people that are doing cool things in the world until you start doing those things or enter those circles. And I always hear from friends like, oh, I wish I would find this partner that likes to go skiing and likes to do these things, or likes to go out on the weekends or whatever. And like, you have to tell your friend, like, you're not going to find them because they're already out doing those things. Like, you got to do those things to find that person that likes to do those things. And,
that's great
I call
advice.
yeah, mycology and science, like anything, it's all the same. So join your community.
That's solid, man. That's good stuff. Well, thanks a lot, Jake. I really appreciate you being on, man, and we will definitely be chatting soon.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, super fun conversation. Let's talk more, definitely.
Absolutely, man. All right, have a good one.
You too.
See ya.
Catch you later.
Bye-bye.